thank you very much, everyone, for coming along to my talk today. And hello to everyone that's joining in on the live stream. And just in case you've got the iPad working, hi, Mum. Also, hi, Louis, and hi to my tabby cats back home in England. Please don't destroy the furniture while I'm gone. So I wanted to talk to you today a little bit about how I got into the industry and games in general, what I do in the industry, and what I've learned from doing it from about 18 years or so. So I've been a gamer for 33 years. I started when I was 6 years old, playing games on the ZX81, the Sinclair ZX81, a very chunky black and white machine, if anyone remembers that. And I used to sit next to my dad while he played the games, and I would draw the maps. I'd have a big pad of graph paper, and I'd sit and I'd draw the maps, because this was long before you got maps in the game, and even long before you got maps in the box as well. And from then on, I went on to playing adventure games with the little girl that lived next door to me. And that was really kind of an 11-year-old and an 8-year-old trying to guess the answers to the Are You 18 questions, which barred the way to the old Leisure Suit Larry games. And these were usually about the American political process, but this was also the game where we learned the word prophylactic. So don't let anyone tell you that games can't be educational. So I've been in the games industry, as I said, for 18 years. I initially started as a journalist, first freelance, and then working on staff for the late, great PC Zone magazine, and also the Guardian newspaper as well. And I went all over the world doing what games journalists do, interviewing and developers, seeing how games are put together, writing news stories and all sorts of things like that. And then I went freelance again, and I got my first gig on the narrative side of games. So I started as a story editor for Beyond Divinity by Larian Studios. So they were the developers behind Divinity Original Sin, and they got me on board because they were looking for a native English speaker to help kind of polish their game up a little bit. And I'd been a big fan of their previous game, and so they thought of me. And from then on, I sort of came out of that gig, and I thought, this seems to be some kind of interesting work I found here. I'll look for some more of this, because it really beats kind of just continual pitching for a living. So I went to my contacts and I said, hey, I'm doing narrative script writing now. Do you need some work? And I got bits and pieces of work that way, and I just grew my credits, really. I worked on a SpongeBob game and a Pac-Man game. I did mission dialogue and barks and level dialogue, and then working my way up to my first AAA game, which was Heavenly Sword on the PS3. So over the time I've been in the industry, a lot has changed in games. So there's now a focus on narrative that was never there before. Like, there were obviously people doing narrative, but they were sort of in dark rooms, and they were never allowed out to talk about the craft or to do this kind of thing, to talk to you now. Now there are awards for video game writing, like the WGA and BAFTAs. There are conferences like the Narrative GDC Summit. There are game workshops popping up all over the world. A lot has changed in that time. So I have been deep in the narrative trenches for a lot of this, and these are some of the games I've worked on. As you can see, there's a whole range of stuff. There's indie games like Beat Buddy or the Overlord games. There's Rival Kingdoms, it's a mobile game. There's new franchises like Mirror's Edge or Heavenly Sword. There's established ones like Tomb Raider, for example. So there's quite a lot of diversity that I've been lucky to be involved with. But I wanted to talk to you a little bit about one of the things I've learned, that story is important, and it is important to players. So we are storytelling creatures. We look for the narrative in everything, and even if you're not purposely putting much narrative in, players are going to be looking for that story anyway. We are humans, we connect to stories, we connect to those experiences. Gameplay might engage the mind, but it's story that engages the heart. And story can make players care about a game and not just understand a game. It engages them in the world. It motivates them. It keeps pushing them forward. Time and time again, I hear players saying, "Oh yeah, I really struggled getting past this part in the gameplay, but I really wanted to find out what happened in the story. I wanted to find out what happened to the character. I wanted to find out what was next for them." Sorry, having clicker issues. So story and character can really help your game stand out. So take something like Telltale Games, for example. Before they worked on The Walking Dead, they were sort of a mid-level indie developer. They're producing kind of solid but not that well-known games. And then they decided to kind of really, really fully embrace narrative, storytelling, character. And they gave us franchises like The Walking Dead, my personal favorite, The Wolf Among Us, Borderlands, Game of Thrones, and they soared in recognition and popularity. And like everyone has heard of them now, and they took over the episodic narrative space, all because they were focusing on story and character. And likewise with Tomb Raider, when we rebooted Tomb Raider in 2013, we put the character and the story and the journey of Lara Croft front and center to what we were doing. We cultivated a respect for the character that went through more than just the narrative, but through the art and through the animation as well. And we put that journey, her journey, central to the play experience for that. And it became the fastest selling game in the franchise's history. It's, I think, now accrued about 8.5 million sales. It spawned a good sequel, which has done just as well as the first game and has just won a Writers Guild Award in LA last week, which I'm very proud about. And thank you. Putting the character's story, the character's journey front and center of that, I think was a big part of why it did well. So, let's talk a little bit about writers. So professional writers really used to be a rarity in the industry. As I said, there was no one, when I was a journalist, I didn't get to kind of talk to writers, like writers can come and talk to me. Writing was normally done by designers or producers or literally anyone that fancied to go or anyone that was thought to be able to put words together in a pleasing order. They would just get to do the story. And there were a few writers out there, but they were kind of few and far between, and they were usually working in other disciplines as well. But now they're becoming a little bit more commonplace. And sort of prior to that, we had this time about 8 or 9 years ago where the industry became a little obsessed with Hollywood, and they were going to get Hollywood writers in, and then Hollywood writers would sprinkle their magic Hollywood pixie dust all over games, and suddenly narrative would soar, and it would become all wonderful because Hollywood got involved. And that didn't really work out too well because games are not movies, and games have their own the kind of rule set and restrictions and power, and you can't just transplant writing to movies into writing for games because it's a very different experience. But we can learn from other mediums. That's not to say there's nothing that film or TV or whatever can teach us. We do tend to get a little obsessed with film because that's sort of seen as the shiny thing. But if you look at the wealth that we've got in TV at the moment, the diversity of character and story, it's truly wonderful. We also need to look at things like theatre, for example. I think that has a lot to teach games, particularly interactive theatre, which is on the rise at the moment. But we really have to recognise our own uniqueness and our own power and how that can sort of transcend into what we're doing in narrative. So, games it's not a passive medium. You're not sitting there and absorbing the story in the way that you are in film and TV. You're in the story. It's all around you. You are the story. You're kind of part and parcel, and that's a hugely powerful experience. And likewise, the role of the player as well, like in the middle of the action, that's completely unique to games. And games can be an incredibly empathic medium. You're literally stepping into the shoes quite often as another character, and I think we've only just started scratching the surface of the power for storytelling and character journeys that has within it. But we really need to start fostering our own talent, and I think that's something that we are sort of starting to do. Like the IGDA Game Writer SIG is a great resource. It's full of professional games writers, those who are interested in narrative, students on their way up, and it's been sort of great for growing new writers and a place where they can kind of get advice and knowledge on the subject. Likewise, as I mentioned, the Narrative Summit at GDC, also very important. But we need to grow our own writers who are specialised in games, so not just transplant them from other mediums, but grow them in our own industry so they're specialised with game and they understand how narrative within the medium works. So throughout the time I've been in the industry, when I first started, the question going around was, should we use professional writers? And I kind of thought, that's really weird, because you're using professional artists, professional programmers, and why should you want to put anything in the game that's not done by a professional or someone who's kind of skilled in that area? But that was, that was the way it was kind of done. And then over the sort of 10 to 15 years, the industry's gone, okay, then we'll use professional writers. And it's kind of got them, and then like, okay, what do we do with them now? And there's been a few teething troubles, so the industry kind of gets to grips with how to work with writers, both in-house and freelance, as I work, and how kind of best to use them and integrate them into a team. So these are kind of some of the teething troubles that we're kind of getting used to along the way. So one of the big ones is that writers are often hired too late. I think you get a whole group of game writers in the room, and it's the one thing that they'll definitely agree on. And they're often hired maybe a year off ship, sometimes 6 months off ship, and they're basically sort of expected to sort of wrap the narrative around the game that's been designed. So it might be a game that's been designed with no narrative in mind, and then you're kind of having to go backwards with the narrative. So everything's there, and now you've got to work out narratively how that happened. And it's a really kind of weird and frustrating way of working. And at best, you get a situation where narrative is sitting on top of the gameplay, so gameplay is like a trifle, and then narrative is kind of sitting on top like the custard. Or at worst, you get a kind of narrative paramedic situation where a poor writer's been drafted in because the story is bleeding terribly, and it's usually because it's maybe been put together without the use of a professional storyteller, or no one's paid attention to it. And the whole game has been designed and redesigned, and things have been put in and fallen out in the way that game design works, and no one's been paying attention to the story, and then someone, usually at publishers, go, oh my God, please get a writer to look at this. And if you're something like 6 months off ship, there's very little writers can do apart from being a narrative paramedic, so sort of patching up the wounds and just sort of helping your story stay alive. But it can be really frustrating. It's really soul-destroying when this happens, because you keep saying, oh, if only I was involved early on, then I could have kind of stopped these terrible things happening. And that used to be the majority of gigs that when I started in the industry that I used to be offered, and they are still around now, and narrative is often treated as a bit of a kind of a wrapper to just be put in kind of at the end, and it's like it'll be, we're done designing a game, and like the word bits will go at the end. Someone will do some words, and that'll be ticked off in a box, and that can come later, because everyone knows that everyone can write, and words are cheap and easy, so it's fine, we'll do something later. Yeah, and on to words. So writers are often hired to do the word bits, and okay, yes, that's kind of part of what we do, is the word bits. But it's not just that. It's not just the writing. And sometimes I think the word writer scuppers us a little bit in this industry, because we think writer equals word bits. And then we think, well, word bits can just be slotted in. But actually what a writer can do is very similar to what a designer can do. So they can world build, they can use the environment and the gameplay and the mechanics to help build the world and seed the narrative in the game and make a kind of world feel cohesive. Oh, I skipped ahead. And ultimately, writers need to be engaged in their teams, so not kept on the outside. And we do get this little situation, okay, this is my kind of jokey kind of manifestation of the situation, but there's been a lot of situations where writers have been, a team has got a writer, but they don't quite know how to deal with them, so they sort of put them over there in a writer box, and instructions go into the writer box, and hopefully a script comes out, and they don't really talk to the writer very much because they're busy making the game, and so like the poor writer is left maybe with one person giving them the instructions. They might not have even seen the game. I've heard horror stories of kind of writers who have written a game. They thought it went fine, and then suddenly the game has come out, and the script bears no resemblance to anything they've done, and something's gone awry somewhere, and usually there's been problems in the design, and they've had to redo the game, and no one's told the writer, and someone else has stepped in and had to kind of patch everything together, and you know, it's the writers had no idea, and maybe if they were sort of a little bit better in the loop, that they could have kind of helped solve those problems. And yeah, you do get this disconnect if you kind of use your writers like that. You kind of get this kind of gameplay trifle and narrative custard on the top. But narrative really benefits when writers are fully integrated in the team. Now, that's a bit easier to do when it's a smaller team. So, for example, with the Overlord games, they were developed in the Netherlands, and I live in London. And I probably went on site maybe 3 times during the course of the project. And yeah, I was there for maybe about a week or so. But when I was off-site, because technology has made the world smaller, I would work every day with each level designer, and they would give me a brief, and I would kind of look at that brief and talk to them about it. And the brief was, what would happen in their level, or what they hope would happen. And they'd talk to me about the things they wanted to highlight from a mechanics point of view, or a level design point of view, or a boss fight point of view. And then I would sort of make the script especially for their level, and they would, likewise, if I said, okay, we need a bit of space for narrative here, they'd sort of create some space for me. And we kind of go back and forth like that. And I was still doing all the writing, but they were kind of fully invested in what I was doing, and they could recognize how their level design talents were helping become part of the story and supporting the story. And that meant when the script went higher up to the creative director, he knew that the person that would have to sweat to put this in the game was kind of okay with it, because they'd been sort of invested in the narrative. I mean, on bigger games, it is harder to do because there are many more levels of people, and that's why things like narrative designers, and God bless narrative designers, because they are a writer's best friend, and they help sort of become a conduit between writers, if they're working freelance, and the rest of the team. For example, with Rise of the Tomb Raider, we had 2 in-staff narrative designers, John Stafford and Cameron Suey, and they were the links for myself and Philip Gillette, who was the additional writer on it, to kind of work with the team, and they would give us all the briefs, and they would filter everything, and they'd decide what we needed to focus on, and it really was a great way of working. I mean, one of the things about being freelance is that I give up a certain amount of power. I'm not in the room to do the fighting, so it's great to have narrative designers who will do that fighting for me. But likewise, it also helps me work in other mediums as well. So I work in film and TV and comics, and that helps strengthen me as a writer. So when I come to a project, I'm more narrative savvy than I might have been if I'd just been working on house on one project. So yeah, narrative definitely benefits when the writers are kind of allowed to do more than just the word bits, and they can kind of get involved with everything else. On the Overlord games, I co-directed a narrative on the second game, and in the first game, and directed it on the first, and that allowed me to sort of take the story from kind of the page into kind of, not quite into the game, but close, and it allowed me to sort of keep control of it. I could get feedback from the actors, I could see what worked and what didn't, and I could make adjustments on the fly, and that was all really useful. And it gave the game a cohesive whole, if you take into consideration what I was doing with the level designers as well. So Overlord started as a kind of little kind of AA game, and I think this cohesiveness to it, the humour that ran through not just the script, but the level design and the animation and voice acting, that helped kind of notch it up to kind of AAA, and it did really well. I think the focus that we had on narrative, and not narrative just through words, but narrative through gameplay as well, really helped us. So, yeah, not to sound too smorty, but we are in this together, and writers need to help engage the rest of the team in the story. Story flows through everything in a game. Story is not just the word bit. Story is the gameplay, it's the animation, it's the mechanics, it's the art, it's the music. Everything should and can support the story, and writers should really be at the forefront of championing this, because they're very good at looking at all the facets of a game and seeing how each part can be used to support the story. To tell better stories, we all have to become better storytellers. So it's not just writers, it's not just the word bits, it's everyone committing to story and supporting the story. So we need to engage with writers. Those writers need to engage with the team. And ultimately, hopefully, this will allow better engagement with players. And that is the ultimate goal after all. Thank you very much.